Hello, and welcome to Nottingham Contemporary. Good morning, and we're so thrilled to have so many people here for the first of a two-day gathering. My name is Sam Thorne. I'm director here at Nottingham Contemporary, and it's my great pleasure to be introducing Cindy and Bo, our co-hosts for this weekend gathering. What they're going to be doing is kind of telling you a little bit about the thinking behind this gathering, about returning to this convention in 1984, and then about how we're going to be using these 2 days to plan about what happens next. Before I hand over to Cindy and to Bo, I'd just like to say a few thanks, first of all, to our friends at New Art Exchange, who've been really important in the shaping of this event, and then also our collaborators at Modern Art Oxford and Spike Island. But special thanks too to a working group who, over the course of regular meetings over this recent months, have really kind of shaped this gathering and brought it together. So thank you to that working group. And then so over to Cindy and Bo, and thank you. And over to Cindy and Bo, who are going to say a little bit more.
So hello, everyone. My name is Cindy. I'm the touring program coordinator at Nottingham Contemporary. So I'm really happy to see you all here. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the Radical Blackout Working Convention Revisited. So I would like to say a big thank you to Marseille as well, and the public program team. Thank you very much for your help, especially the last few days. And to Nadi, so the gallery assistant who's going to be there for the 2 days of the convention. So, Bo, do you want to introduce yourself quickly, and then I can...
Yeah. Hi, my name is Bo, and I'm the community engagement producer for New Art Exchange, but I also work as an independent engagement curator.
So the convention is being developed when initial conversation about the planning of the convention took place in January with artists, community leaders, activists, and institutions. So from this meeting, a working group was formed, including Catherine Ross and Lynda Burrell from Museumand, the National Caribbean Heritage Museum, which are sitting just there. Louise McKenna, which is just there as well. Hi, wave. Nicole Crentsil, and David Stickman Higgins. So thank you very much. Big thank you. When the convention was organized by art students from Trent University in 1984, the starting point was the examination of contemporary black art, highlighting its successes and failures relative to the economic, social, and political realities faced by the black community, both in this country and worldwide. So you can find a copy of the program on the tables. There's one of each. The working group and myself has taken this objective as a starting point, and kind of revisiting some of the similar conversations at the time, but in relation to our current socio-political context of today. So I think the convention is more relevant than ever. It is high time that people gather and connect and really engage in discussions that I'm hoping are going to be taken further than the 2 days at the convention here.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to be co-hosting with Cindy, and also I'm going to be a bit of a kind of timekeeping and keeping an eye on things with the mics and everything. I'm just going to give you a quick outline of the 2 days, but there are programs on your tables. So over the 2 days, we're going to start off this morning with a panel discussion with Marlene Smith, artist Marlene Smith, Claudette Johnson, Saeed, artist Charles Washington, who's an artist and activist. And they'll be kind of setting the tone of the day, but also during the panel discussion, there will be an opportunity during about half that time for question and answers. And also to bear in mind when we're doing the roving mics and when we are discussing things, just to, respect people's opinions, and also give as much time and opportunity for people to, voice their opinions. So basically, don't hog the mic, if you don't mind doing that. People know what I mean. So after the panel discussion and Q&A, we'll have a lunch break, and you'll have the opportunity to sign up to different tables. You'll notice there's table numbers on each table, and there'll be a different subject for you to kind of join and discuss. I'm just going to rattle these off very, very quickly. So table 1 will be around question of representation by Agency for Agency and Barbie Asanto and Teresa. So that will be exploring, is it good enough to simply kind of show artists of colour in institutions? Table 2 will be around a question of presence, black women and representation by Women of Colour Index and Reading Group from London. Table 3 will be around education by David Stickman Higgins over there. Table 4 will be around identity, memory and locality by Museumand. Table 5 will be around black women representation and mental health issues by Nicole Crentsil from London, as a curator and artist. And then table 6, we've got an open table, which is open for possible ideas for discussion from the audience. And also to just mention over the 2 days that from these discussion points, the second day really is about kind of moving things forward. So we'll have these discussions today, but the next day really is about action points and what we can do next, because there is an opportunity for what comes out of this convention to do another event or a project. So there's a small pot of money. So if you are coming tomorrow, it'd be really great if you can attend and join your chosen tables. The one final thing I just need to mention is if you need to get any tea or coffee, the tea urn will be actually turned off in a couple of minutes, but it will be go back on during another break. Okay, to carry on with the housekeeping, there is, just to say, the toilets are just on the right when you come out of the space, and fire exits are where the green lights are. So I'm going to hand over to the panel. So there is Claudette Johnson, Said Adras, Marlene Smith, and Charles Washington. And I wanted to say a few words about Charles, which is chairing the panel today, which is really important. I think it was really important to invite him today. So Charles was studied in fine arts at Trent Polytechnic, which is now Trent University, in the beginning of the 70s. And he developed a practice as a sculptor. He also joined the Arts Council on the advisory board, and his role within the Arts Council, alongside Gavin Dunches, contributed to the first policies around diversity. So, yes, I think it was really important to mention that. Okay, so I hand it over to you now. Okay. Thank you very much. Yeah, you can.
Firstly, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you. It's so good to see this room nearly full with people interested in the subjects that we're going to talk about today. I have some very distinguished people that have been involved with the historical development of black arts in this country. And in fact, I would say my privilege has been here when some of it began. The very first black arts convention took place here in Nottingham following the publication of Nassim Khan's commissioned work, which was titled The Art Britain Ignores. And the art Britain ignores is a sort of art that comes from communities like the group here represents, mainly Asian and African, Caribbean. So the very first convention and working convention actually took place in this city. The Midland Group, which was an art center, now closed, took a very brave move to actually host Eddie Chambers and what's his name again? Keith Piper. Several artists filled up a gallery the size of this. And that was like more than 30 years ago. So I was around in those days, and so I feel very privileged to be here today at the second convention, working convention of black artists and the black artist movement. And rather than go around and say a lot more, because I do have a lot more to say, I do want to introduce the three artists that are sitting at the table with me, and also perhaps suggest some questions. And obviously, I'm hoping that you have questions of your own that you feel are important to explore, and that we will explore not only today, but tomorrow as well, in terms of what happens after this convention. And so let me begin by introducing Marlene Smith, who's been around for quite a long time. She's an artist. I shouldn't have put it that way.
I'm joking.
But she's not only an artist, she's also a curator, and she's currently a researcher with the Black Artist Modernism Project. She's working on a PhD at the moment, and that's on women's practice during the Black Arts movement. And she was a member of the Black Art Group with Claudette Johnson, who's also here today, Eddie Chambers, Keith Piper. Eddie Chambers, unfortunately, was a very powerful member of that group, but now he's a resident in the United States. He's done very well in terms of his career, and he's an intellectual, I should add. In addition to that, Donald Rodney was a member of that group. He's now deceased, but he was a very powerful member of that group, and his work is exhibited around the country. I'd like to say about Claudette. Claudette is on my left here, and she's a London-based artist, and she was a member of the Black Art Group back in the 80s. I won't say a long time ago, I'll say back in the 80s. And she took part in a number of serious shows organized by Lynda Hammett. I don't even know if I pronounced the name correctly. Lynda Hammett. And she currently works and teaches in London, and her recent shows include Thin Black Lives. Black Lives, yeah, right. And she's got work exhibited at the Tate Britain and also at Hollybush Gardens. And so, in brief, that's the panel today, except I have not mentioned Saeed. Saeed and I share history because Saeed actually comes from East Africa, so he is an African of Asian descent, and he came to this country via a long route. He spent time in Switzerland, and he came here in Nottingham, and in actual fact, he was involved in some organizations that are historical. He was a member of Chroma, and fortunately, we have 3 members of Chroma. I don't know if any of you know about Chroma, but it was the it was the acronym for an organization called Chronicle of Minority Arts, and it was established following the publication of Nassim Khan's commission work, which I've already mentioned. But the first such group to take off was Chroma. The first such group in the whole entire country took place here. And we have Saeed as an original member. Okay. Due to my age, I'm a bit forgetful about names, so please forgive me for that. But,
Sardu.
yeah.
Sardu.
I'm even having difficulty with a little bit of my nerves, so please forgive me. But 3 of us are here from those original days, and I think that's a good survival rate. Some of us have passed away. But with introductions virtually over, what I want to say now is I will introduce some subjects that I'm interested in, but they don't have to stop there because we're mainly interested in questions you have and things that you would like answered from our panel. But the sort of things I'd like to kick off with is that, and I'll tell you why I kick off with it. Rather than be abstract about what is art and the definition of art terms, like we could argue all day about what is art, but I don't come from that background. I had formal training as an art teacher. I trained with Leicester University, and so if you're teaching art, you have to know what you're talking about. You can't teach something that's indefinite and something imprecise. You have to be able to define what art is in a very practical way. And so we come up with definitions like art is the recreation of yourself. It's the representation of what you feel is important in life. It's the sort of communication you would like to have with your neighbors. It's those sorts of things that are positive. In actual fact, your art really resembles you. And it tells the world what you are about. And so I'm saying that with an exhibition like we have here today at the Contemporary, you have a display of so-called black art. And it's distinctive because no one else could come up with that kind of art because it reflects our experience. It recreates our experience. It presents a picture, a window in. And so my feeling is that if that's the case, what is the role of a black artist? And perhaps some of our panel members will be able to define what they consider their role, if in fact it's distinctive from anybody else. I mean, it's just not just being an artist, being a black artist. What does that mean in terms of their own work? So really, I'm saying we can be very definite about what is black art. Now, to sum up, I have a feeling that this is the second working convention of the Black Artists Group. The very first one took place more than 30 years ago. This is the second one. Hopefully, we will have further discussion that takes us till tomorrow, and then tomorrow I hope we're able to decide on where we go from there. We know where we were, and today is here. Where will we be tomorrow, say in the next 20 years, in terms of what it means to have black artists in our society, what it is that they're trying to express, what makes them distinctive from other artists, et cetera, et cetera. But we have a big job ahead of us, and can we kind of kick off? I don't know if anyone here on this table wants to address one of the questions that has already been wrote. In fact, I'm going to say something. Marlene, you're the nearest to me.
Yes,
right. And I would say, you are an artist, you've proven yourself. My first time meeting you was in West Midlands. It was a long time ago. But Marlene was working for West Midlands Regional Arts Association.
Arts Service.
Okay. See,
a sister to Chroma.
You are?
Right. I think you might have to use your mic as well. Because
sorry.
otherwise people won't hear you.
Is that better? Okay, so, right. Charles, you've already given us a host of questions. So I'm going to jump in at the most difficult one, or for me, the most difficult one, which is that question about, what is the role of a black artist and how is that different to any other artist?
Closer to you.
Okay. Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay. And I feel as though I'm going to disappoint you, Charles, in terms of my response to that, but I'm going to give it anyway. I don't actually think that there is a different role for a black artist than any other artist. I don't tend to spend a lot of time trying to define what art is or what it should be. That is not really what I am about. Certainly, I don't think that's what I'm about in 2017. I do think that within my own practice, retrospectively looking, it's an interesting position to be in, to be down here in the basement talking about today, really. We're here to talk about today, but we are framing today in a kind of retrospective look back at what happened in 1984. So I'm kind of going to do this thing where I'm jumping between those three odd decades. In 1984, when I was in my early 20s, I was looking for definitions, and I was looking for a community of like-minded folk trying to create an art that would speak very urgently about some very difficult social and political realities. And so if you come across or the material that we created in the early 1980s, it speaks very rhetorically, it speaks very powerfully, very politically, very overtly about the response to that time. And I'm not, I'm not being apologetic about it. That is what it was, and that's how it felt. And certainly within the Black Art group, we made attempts at making statements about what we wanted our work to be and what we wanted Black art to be. And that's kind of historically on the record. In 2017, I'm working on a project called Black Artists and Modernism, for example, where we are looking back at, not just at the 80s, but at the kind of whole trajectory of Black artists' presence within the art world, particularly within the art world, in the UK. I'm echoing now. Am I? It's just echoing in my ears then. And what we're trying to do there is to say not that necessarily that Black art is different to, that the work that Black people make is different to the work that white people make. What we're saying is, within the Black Artists and Modernism project, is that why is it that when Frank Bowling makes powerful, beautiful, incredibly technically astounding work, why is it that when there's a survey of abstract art of that era, Frank Bowling, forgive me if I make assumptions about people knowing these names. Frank Bowling is an artist who is now in his 80s. So he's been making work since the 1950s, but in the 1960s to 70s, he was really very high profile. He was making work both here and in the US. He was selling work, which is like, and he had a very high profile. However, when surveys of that type of work were being made in this country, he was never included in those surveys. So he was excluded from his contemporaries. So within the Black Artists and Modernism project, the task is not necessarily to say the content of Black artists' work is different, the way that Black artists go about making work is different. The context there is to say, how is it that there is this history of Black artists in the UK from at least the 1930s, and yet, within the canon, that work is not reflected. So that when I was an art student when I was studying for my A-levels, and I asked my tutors about Black artists, they told me that there were no Black artists. And they didn't do that because they were trying to to exclude people. They did that because they had been to art school, and they didn't know that there were Black artists in the UK. And so the Black Artists and Modernism project is trying to make an intervention in the early part of the 21st century to say, oh, come on, let's just kind of try and correct this now. Let's try and get this historical record sorted. So there are Black artists whose work has been bought for the nation, whose work is, Frank Bowling's work, for example, is in the Tate collection. But then within the Tate collection, the way that work was contextualized is to frame it purely in terms of his ethnicity. Yeah? So you go into Tate Britain, this was actually, look at a display of artists whose work is, let's say it's roughly sort of 1969 to 74 within a particular display, range of artists. You look at the labeling of the art. It follows a format. The format says name of artist, name of work, year the work was made, those kinds of that kind of information. Biographical information may be part of it, but with the black artists, it seemed that there's a different narrative that was told about that work. So instead of telling us, I expect a label in a museum to tell me what is important about this artist, why is this artist's work collectible, why is it collected for the nation, why is it in this room with these other artists, tell me something about this piece of work, and something about the artist. With the black artists, we tend to get lots of biographical information about where they're from, and we also get, the other thing that we get, unfortunately, is this whole notion of their work being derivative. So, yeah. So, sorry, this is a very long-winded answer to your question, Charles. So the issues for me in 2017 in terms of looking at black artist practice is not necessarily how is it different to other artist practice. Because I don't think that intrinsically, and there are people out there who will disagree with me, I don't think intrinsically that I'm making my marks any differently to anybody else. I don't think that when I mimetically move my hand across a piece of paper, that I'm going to do that in any way different to any other person, or rather, maybe I am going to do it differently to every other person, but not because of my racial origin. Yeah? So that's not the issue for me. The issue is about equity. It's about systemic racism and what we do to confront that systemic racism within the art world. And it's about the art world being mature enough and politically ready and emotionally secure enough to have a conversation about race and gender and other issues too. But we're talking about black art here, so I'll kind of confine my remarks to race. It is not necessarily every black artist's project to strive for what we might call a black aesthetic, and I'm really happy to have a conversation about what that might be, but I think that's a slightly separate question. And it's also, I'm going to shut up in a minute, let other people come in. In 1982, Charles, I do have to correct you. In 1982, the Black Art Group organised the first National Convention of Black Art, and that happened in Wolverhampton. So the working convention in 84 was our second attempt to bring people together. But I'm going back to 82 because during that event at Wolverhampton, Rashida Reed, and for those of you that don't know, Rashida Reed is also in his 80s. He is an artist who came to the UK was it the 1960s that he came? Late 50s, okay. And there's work by Rashid upstairs in the gallery. He's a phenomenon, so I can't say too much about Rashid. But in 1982, he was invited by the Black Art Group to come to Wolverhampton to give the sort of opening talk at the convention. And he had a really clear kind of proposal around black art. And for him, black art was to black artists as feminist art is to women artists. So in other words, it had a very political content and it had a very political purpose. So for him, Frank Bowling wouldn't be making black art. Frank Bowling, remember I said Frank Bowling is making abstract works. Rashid and Frank are similar age group. they have a different approach to making work, certainly at that time. And Rashid is putting forward a proposal about what black art is and how we should go forward. And he's saying political, making reference to, and also not just depicting our experience. And for Rashid, black is a term that really is correlates to a sort of post-colonial population. It's a population of people who have come from somewhere where the experience of imperialism and colonial powers has resulted in certain patterns of migration, and that's what he's addressing in his work at that time, and that's what he sees the Black Art Project as being. And that's quite different to other artists who would have been making work at that same time. So even though we talk about this Black Art movement, there's quite a spectrum of ideas about what that means. So for me, looking back at it now, my feeling is there's the thing that draws all that together for me is this relationship to the center. It's being racialized, being othered, being on the periphery rather than part of the whole conversation. So for me, what black art, so I don't really have a manifesto for what artists should be doing. In my own practice and as a user, I call myself a user of art because it's necessary to me. I am interested, I'm particularly drawn to work that challenges me, whether I'm making it or I'm using it, that requires me to think and rethink, and I'm particularly interested in settings where there's a dialogue between the art, the artists, and the audiences. So those are the things that I personally want to be involved in, but I don't necessarily see that as a manifesto for everybody else's practice. Yeah, I definitely want to work alongside people who also want to do those types of things.
Well, Marlene, I want to thank you for that. That was a rather lengthy explanation. I appreciate it that it was a lengthy one, but we have time for two other people to come into it. But I do want to mention that, and you hinted at it, there is a political element that involves us all. And I'm going to tell you a very short little anecdote. The parent was addressed by his child who said, "Dad, why is Jesus always painted white?" In a sense, that was a political question. And the father's response to that question, interestingly enough, was to say to the child, "You must learn to paint." And so, I mean, really, earlier it was mentioned that what the role of an artist does, he presents himself or herself who they are. And no one can do it better than they. And so if you were to see Egyptian art, you would see Pharaoh. In a second, you'd see Pharaoh. You'd see 2,000, 3,000 years of history in contemporary Egyptian art. And so black art is actually presenting our experience, which is different. It's enriching a public about things that perhaps you don't know. I had the experience of asking a gallery assistant here in this building, what is the significance of having an exhibition of this scale in this building, this day, costing thousands of pounds? Why is it important? Why should a local authority take it on themselves to do this? Anyway, enough of that. That's another discussion. But Saeed, would you like to pick up?
Thank you, Marlene. Oh, sorry, very heavy. Yes, I think as Charles and Marlene said, eloquently and in a lot of important ways, it's kind of, in a way, it's interesting because there's an exhibition upstairs called The Places Here, and quite an interesting title, and it's about, as we kind of assume we know that, it's about that kind of time period of the 80s decade. And at the same time, we're discussing, or we're trying to discuss in this situation, a lot of the kind of issues that were raised in the works that are upstairs. And the time frame is different now, it's 2017, it's a kind of a 30-year plus gap. And it's quite difficult in a way for individuals who were kind of working in that time, for myself and Marlene, so we were practicing. I was a student here, and the place is here. For me, the connection is, I came to Nottingham and I studied in the early 80s fine art. So I was kind of fellow student with Keith Piper at fine art, and Donald Rodney was a year younger, so he was in another year, and there were a few other kind of what we make term black students. So there is that kind of connection for me. At the same time, in this very serious sort of situation that we're discussing, the important issues, that I had a kind of, in a way, I was living with Keith and Donald actually in Hyson Green, where Asda is. So I lived in Nottingham, and Asda is behind the New Art Exchange at the moment. So as students, and I'm sure Marlene came for a couple of meetings and whatever, various points, discussing various issues as art students. And they were very similar, certain issues that I feel that we're discussing now. And not to confuse the situation, but the Other Story exhibition, we mentioned the word other, in 1989, curated mainly by Rashida Reed. And Rashida Reed is a kind of interesting guy. He comes from Pakistan, he's an engineer. Frank Bowling studied at Royal College, I think. He's kind of a contemporary of Peter Blake, Hockney. And Rashid is a kind of a self-taught guy, an engineer. And his early works, if you look at it, was looking at minimalism, but kind of with engineering craft, the design of it and the making and material of steel, etc. The reason I'm kind of going into the aesthetic, because aesthetic is important, the form. And that's always been a kind of contentious issue for artists, for myself, I'm speaking for myself, but a lot of us, that the politics can override. And I said that you can only be angry when you are young. And I think I was angry. A lot of my work, and as a kind of a part of this panel, I might show a couple of examples because I'm a visual artist. And I would like, when I talk, I would like to have a kind of a journey, not only reflecting on my personal feelings and experiences, but a journey of certain developments in my work. And I might show you examples. It's a kind of haunting space here, actually. It's like a bunker here at the moment. Not to confuse the situation, I mentioned Rashida Reed and the Other Story. So we are kind of revisiting this big exhibition that kind of took place. It's definitely not like the Other Story, because the artists were very few. It was held at the Hayward Gallery. So in a way, the time, 25 plus years, there's another exhibition that's taking place here. I think there were several exhibitions between, the thing is, when we talk about this thing, we're talking about 84, and for me, in this situation, partly in that first meeting about a month ago or something, when we had that meeting here, we're always kind of talking about now and then at the past. It can seem a bit, not confusing, but that's the kind of situation we are in. It's important. So, the other issue is that, are we trying to find answers? For me, actually, in this exhibition and the Black Art Convention, which was quite radical, not only from the Wolverhampton one, but the Nottingham one, the issues raised were very kind of social, political reference. But we were in a times where Margaret Thatcher came into power, late 79. there was first time, I mean, myself, I used to live in Birmingham actually, and interestingly, Marlene, you're from Birmingham. So Keith Piper and Donald Rodney and Eddie Chambers, whom I met, Eddie Chambers I met in Nottingham, were all from West Midlands. It's really, but I didn't know Keith and Donald. I was living actually not far from them in that situation in Spark Hill, Sparkbrook area. But I went to do foundation college I went to foundations course in Stourbridge, which is outside Birmingham, for 2 years, and then I came to Trent. But the kind of the reggae groups of the kind of the urban environment, the inner city posters. Now we're talking about post-punk and the clash with around, the sort of the anger, the protest of that kind of music and the lyrics was quite important for a lot of us, and especially for me. I loved it, and I came from a kind of situation from middle clean Switzerland in this urban milieu. You might have read books. I might have read books about New York or London and things like that. So it was a kind of a totally different space, quite angry, dirty, things like that. I took it for kind of as an inspiration. The protest outside in the urban scroll graffiti, but not the tag graffiti that we might know. So the aesthetic kind of penetrated into some of the prints I did or the image and text paintings. So this backdrop of Margaret Thatcher and the uprisings that happened in the late 70s, early 80s, the communities were on the spotlight. And there were all sorts of issues were being discussed in various fields, in various kind of work situations. And of course, undoubtedly, as I might say, the second generation or the younger generation of artists from Asia, Africa, Caribbean had a kind of attachment, affinity to those issues. Steel Pulse in Birmingham, the reggae group, Hands with Revolution. But there were a lot of other things, whether it's poetry or writing, and this was the backdrop of looking at it perhaps in Britain at that particular time. So here this kind of situation which definitely is quite present upstairs in some of the work. To fast forward a situation that post-Brexit, which was mentioned in the previous meeting, and we are, I think, largely aware of the racism and the kind of contentious issues facing, the question is the artist of color or black or whoever, is he or she responsible in dealing with these issues primarily, or he or she has got leeway, room to explore other aesthetics? And I think I agree with Marlene, and the whole thing is about conversation today, not amongst ourselves here, between me, Charles, Claudette, Marlene. Importantly, the contributions and the kind of a discussion and the dialogue, having said that there's no answers, there are questions that are emerging, the questions that have emerged. And art is in one way trying to express that. So I would see it as more like a conversation initially, and with reference to some visuals, and then taking it from there. I always feel like just now, like I might be talking a lot. Yeah, but maybe just show a couple of examples, and Claudette can come in and contribute, yeah?
Saeed, I'd like to thank you for that, because it was inclusive. It included some of the politics that we'd want to be a part of this conversation. And we're going to have Claudette talk a bit about her reactions to some of the things that have already been said. Yes, but to give you a chance to think, in terms of the politics, it was interesting meeting Sam last night, and Sam was the person who opened this exhibition today. And what Sam was able to tell me in his background is that he opened a free art school in London. Quite an exceptional thing. And it makes a lot of difference to people who are recently to this country. I met Keith Rodney while he was a student at the Trent Polytechnic, and he was brilliant. He was a very good writer in addition to being a graphic artist. But what he wrote about really opened your mind. And in fact, his chief sponsor, and the reason that he had an exhibition along with Chambers in the Midland Gallery at the time was because his tutor was none other than Jane Todd. I don't know if people here would know of Jane Todd, but she was the chief executive for the city of Nottingham recently. But at the time she met Rodney, she was his tutor. And she says, we've got this brilliant student. Where did he come from? He came from Birmingham. And what did he do in Birmingham? He was a youth who had a lot to say. He had a serious problem with stuttering. And so he expressed himself well through visual arts. So well that he became distinguished. And that humble student, today he's an assistant professor. Unfortunately, he could not be here today, but really, I want to point out that the very first time we met in this city at the Midland Group, as a welcoming of one of the first black, you corrected me saying something happened in 1982 in West Midlands, but it happened here in 1983, which was a year later. What I'm saying is that for opportunities facing students of whatever background, they must have the opportunity. They must have access to facilities. I'm going to say something openly. I don't know if legal people are around, but at the time that the exhibition took place in Nottingham, it was not supposed to happen because Keith was subsidized as a student. He had facilities laid available to him through taxpayers' money. He had tutors, he had materials, he had a studio, all free because he was a student. Really, he should not have had an exhibition in a building reserved for professionals, people who were making a living on the basis of what they were producing as art. So one of the things that happened is that the movement, the Black Arts movement, really had to do about opening up new opportunities. It had to do with education. It had to do with attracting young people who may have something to express, and they wanted to express it visually. There are many ways of expressing your art. You can do it in music. You can do it in fashion. You can do it all sorts of ways, in theater, through your writing, etc. But in terms of the visual arts, no, there has to be opportunities. And fortunately for us, people like Keith, like Claudia, like Saeed, like Marlene, I'm sorry, I'm talking away from the mic. They had to have an opportunity, and there you are. And in terms of what's happening now, we want to continue. You hear that? We're moving on. So Claudette, however you feel about what we're addressing today, perhaps you can pick up. And after that, I think we really want to lay it over to you in terms of questions you may have for any one of us, and myself included. I am different than these practicing artists. I also went to art school. I trained as a sculptor. I have all the qualifications and so forth. But I could never find work. I could never teach in public schools or in state schools. And I kind of emerged from there, and I did other things. I did local government service. I worked in the library services, etc. But what I really wanted to do was express my background, express my experience, recreate where I came from, have something to say about politics, have something to say about racism, which I've had it up to the neck with racism coming from the United States, but I couldn't do that. And what's happening now is that we have a bit more freedom to express ourselves. Claudette, can you pick up? Would you like to pick up?
Yeah, I'm really glad that that you just mentioned Keith, because Keith Piper, that is, because I wanted to quote him in relation to how art came to be defined as black art in the early 80s when I got involved with the Black Art Group. Keith wrote in a very small publication that we produced for one of the shows, he wrote, let's build our art into an enzyme around which to rally the people. And when I joined the Black Art Group, I had a sense of wanting the work that I was making to be part of what I would have described at the time as the struggle for civil rights of black people in the UK. And there was, everyone talked about anger, and there was a huge anger because we were the first generation of people born in Britain who therefore were British, and yet seen as other, and yet not being able to claim a real allegiance to that other place, wherever that might be, Caribbean, Africa, Asia. So there was a sense of urgency about making something that established our presence here and was kind of immovable, kind of said, we are here and we're here to stay. And so for me, the significance of the place is here, that that title has been used for this exhibition upstairs, has many resonances because it was what we were trying to do. We were saying this place is our place, we are here, and we have a right to be in this location. I'm going to try and come back to my opening point, which is about art and struggle, and I know Charles has been trying to pick that up too. I first saw the work of Eddie Chambers and Keith Piper in a show in Wolverhampton, I think about 1981, might be 1980, but I think it was 1981. And there was a piece in that show by Eddie Chambers, which was called, and again, I might have got the title very slightly wrong, but it's something like, who know black now, now go black again. So if you're not black now, in this time, in this moment, then you never will be. And I'm pretty sure that the image was a mirror that he screen printed on with images of, let's call them rioters, black rioters around the peripheries, and with those words printed across in black text in his famous letters. I remember seeing that and thinking, yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. And so I then joined the Black Art Group, and it was a significant moment because I studied art at Wolverhampton Polytechnic, as it was then, it became a university halfway through my course. And I remember being the only black student in my year, and that in the year above me there was one black student, and the year above that, one black student. And that seemed significant. And I had a sense, it sounds paradoxical, but I had a sense of our absence in that space. So I would have a lot of conversations with my tutors about, were there other black artists so I could look at their work, and where would I find that, and could they give me any pointers? And as Marlene said, I was told that they don't exist. And in fact, they encouraged me to kind of have tutorials with the wife of one of the lecturers who was a black American poet. And that was as close as they felt they could get me to someone who might be able to address the content of my work as opposed to the form. Lots of people were happy to talk to me about the form, about the aesthetic practice, but the tutors would always say, well, we can't really talk about the images you're making because, they're not really for us. So then being able to join the Black Art Group and seeing that there were other artists, other art students out there making work that took the black figure as the subject, and and spoke about the experience of being first generation black people in Britain, was a very powerful moment. I think I'm about to lose my track. Yeah, I have lost it.
No, I think
I've completely lost what I was going to say.
It's very interesting. That I think the art college and it's an issue. I was just talking to a friend, Frank, who is actually part of one of the tables here. Frank is a filmmaker and taught at Trent. And there's so much dynamics about the art school then and even now. And in a sense that the younger artists of, diverse backgrounds or whatever, and I think that kind of the importance of art education, of course, it's changed. I can relate to exactly what you're saying. I didn't have any tutor who would be regarded as black, Asian or whatever. I had one of my head of fine art, I think it was. He happened to go to India and started painting, those temples. And I don't come from a Hindu background, and actually at that time I was very young when I was in India, but I went after college to India with my family to visit. But anyway, he just wanted to discuss his works, massive paintings about these massive sculptures, and so that was a kind of an indirect reference to my origin. Another tutor had gone to Nigeria from here, and he talked about his experience. So it was really something that I would have wanted somebody to kind of understand some of the issues that maybe was just boiling inside me. And I was kind of, born in East Africa from Indian origin and lived in, one or two other countries and came to Britain as kind of a diaspora, very complicated, perhaps unusual. However, I just wanted to kind of affiliate with certain situations and people and group. But within the art context, it's always been interesting within how the curriculum was then. And I have taught at art colleges in various places, including Norway and Switzerland. And of course, it's changing. It's changed a lot. And one of the research groups that we have, British Black Artists and Modernism, is based within the University of Arts London. So there's a lot of change, a lot of kind of discussion, and papers are being written. But the issue within the fine art context is quite, I think it's really important even today for younger generation artists, younger students, within the framework of the exhibition, within the framework of the practice as well. And I think from what I've read, there are certain emerging artists and are going to participate and create this kind of facilitate the grouping. So there will be kind of room to develop that further and have a discussion around. That's kind of pivotal in a way.
I really want to thank you for as far as you've taken us. But I'm conscious of the fact that we do have an audience and they've not had an opportunity to be reactive to things that we have said so far.
Sure.
And perhaps if anyone has questions at this point, they will address. What you have witnessed is the fact, four of us here, we all come from different perspectives, different points of view. And it could be that one of those points of view might interest you. So please feel welcome to raise questions. There's someone with a microphone. Please, we will take 2 or 3 questions at a time. And please, if you raise a question, could you introduce yourself and tell us who you are?
No, maybe turn it, there's a switch there. Another one. That's okay, yeah, go on, fire.
That's fine. Hello. Hi. Okay, reverb. The exhibition's been fantastic, and there have been some great related workshops, and Panya Banjoko ran a last week, and really encouraged us to get involved in connecting with the artists. So Keith Piper, what you were saying about him was really relevant. How would you feel your eye has changed between then and now? That's a big question.
Right, so we're going to take 3 questions.
What is that question?
And then we're going to
respond.
Back and respond.
Yeah, okay. first question is about how
has
it's changed. Yeah.
Hello, my name's Jade Foster. I'm an art student at the moment. My question is, do you think that global politics...
Sorry. Oh, yeah,
Can you repeat that, please?
Okay, my name's Jade Foster. I'm a current art student at the moment, studying at University of Derby. My question is, do you think global politics really influences the subject matter that people are talking about, issues that people are talking about today? So things like having conversations over social media, a lot of online forums, a lot of online conventions at the moment. Do you think that really changes the discourse that people are having? So this transnational kind of conversation where we're having discussions with people in Canada, people in the US, Black Lives Matter movement, stuff like just general politics of today, global politics of today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jagdish. I grew up near Wolverhampton in the 70s, and I know Wolverhampton is where Enoch Powell made his Rivers of Blood speech, and the legacy of that is something you lived with throughout the 70s and the racism. And I only say that because, to a large extent, as people, not just as artists, the environment that you grow in radicalizes you and forces you to think about radical politics. You enter that. And I say that because the term, there's a lot of discussion about radical art, and you've talked about the political scene, but the convention in the 80s was a radical black artist, and the text for the convention makes a clear distinction that this is about radical black art, not about black arts. And I think it's an important point, and it's an important point as black artists, that not just people in the 80s, but we've confronted all of that, throughout history. When you look at some of the modernism painters and people in the 1930s, you can see them going through this dialogue between
Can I just interrupt you 1 second? You're moving the mic a lot.
Okay, sorry.
I'm losing
I'll try and
what you're
keep still.
saying. Yeah.
And then can you be your observation or a comment, but a bit of a shorter question? Sort of?
Yeah, I'll come to the question. It's just, in the 30s, you can see the black artists who are trained in modernism in Europe going back to India or Africa and having the debate in their minds between how to use art for the independence movements and the workers' struggles. Right. And I think the question is this debate about, are we producing art for the white art establishment, or are we producing art for the community? And it's important because it's much easier for me to bring white artists to look at the art than people from my own community. And how we have that debate and how we engage with people is important, because it's somehow how those issues are raised and discussed, and how art and culture raises community is important. And I think it's that link between the communities I wanted to talk about.
Thank you.
Go for it. Yes.
Right. How do you feel your eyes have changed? Right.
Then and now.
It's really, I don't know how to answer that question, other than to say that one comparison that I would make between the work that I was making in 1984 and a piece of work that I started making in 2014 and haven't finished yet, is that my focus and my gaze and I am consumed by a different type of dialogue that I want to have. So one of the things that was happening with my work in the 80s, and there's one piece in the show upstairs, is that I was trying to make images about a certain type of experience, which was often focusing on my mother's generation rather than my generation. Certainly was talking about female experience, and was trying to use objects and the types of objects that would be kind of in her domestic space to speak about a particular experience and trying to make those objects speak rather than to make the body speak. So that's what I was grappling with specifically around the work that I was making in the 80s. Whereas when I started to make this last piece of work, the conversation that I was having was a much more internal conversation. I wasn't trying to present that experience externally. I was trying to not think about that external stuff and to feel my way through the material. Sorry, for anybody who's in this room who isn't an artist, I know this sounds like bullshit, but that is, you asked me about the eyes, so you know. So the only way that I can explain that briefly, without kind of taking up another half an hour, is that I was reading Toni Morrison. So I read Toni Morrison for the first time in about 1982. Everything happened in 1982 for the first time for me. And I read The Bluest Eye, and it just changed my life. And then I was reading more recently, or was I reading or was I listening to Toni Morrison talking about what it is that she does with her work. And one of the key things about Toni is she doesn't try to explain black people to white people. She just doesn't try to do that at all. She does something else in the dialogues that happen with her characters. And I think it's really interesting when you close your frame. So that's what's happened. Sorry, long drawn up. My frame is closing.
Thank you.
That's
are we going
really
to?
interesting.
So we do the
Just
three.
do that
yeah,
question.
Yeah, the first question.
Yeah, okay. I think if I'm correct, did you say how our eyes change, our perception from then to now in practice and generally, yeah? I think Marlene is kind of eloquently, very interesting. Great to hear that. I think undoubtedly it's sort of schizophrenic for me would be a harsh word to use even for myself, but I don't know why I'm using it. But it's kind of that pull, the push and pull in my situation from then and now. As I said earlier briefly that I don't want to make a big deal out of it, but I think that that maybe I was a bit angry, perhaps, you know, in a situation and as an individual, as a young student, and perhaps things, what was happening around me, maybe those are the external things that kind of influenced me, and I said from music or whatever. But at the same time, I think there was a sense of maybe the time was different. How we got together, just generally as students or young artists, and there was a kind of an urge in a way to just talk and have a rapport, you know, like kind of the things that we kind of felt strongly about, that kind of a feeling of unity. I think for that was quite important for me at that time, and that could filter into our expressions. But having said that, I still feel that within this conversation and what have you, time has changed in works of individuals, and in my case, what kind of practice one does. It's always been certain, kind of dogged by that you are from a certain background, that you have to, are you forced? I don't think one is forced to produce work like that, depending on your situation. As an individual or the commissioning process, I think it's one thing creating art, and when you put it out in a public, this is a public gallery museum as well, and there's been a lot of issues about how certain artists who are largely exhibiting upstairs, generally what even myself, what I went through with group exhibitions in different cities was kind of aimed and framed in a certain way. But having said that, there is this particular piece was created by curated in an exhibition by Eddie Chambers called Black People in the British Flag. And it was, I think, in early 90s or 92, 93. So in a sense, after 84, it's kind of an interesting middle period. But this flag is a symbol, for me, as a kind of a visual aesthetic, was definitely kind of partly influenced from Jasper Jones' American flag work in mixed media. But what it actually summed up, and the question within that exhibition was, how do we relate to this Union Jack, the issue that was kind of hijacked largely in the 70s by NF, National Front. and the blue and the white and the red, that signifies that the colors were kind of associated with sort of nationalism, or white nationalism. And this curated project opened up, and how we responded as artists. And it was not a large exhibition, but I did this with a friend and partner, Burjan Hunjan, the artist. So this is the flag, which was kind of exhibited in Brick Lane much later, and it's called Trespassing. You walk through it. Normally a flag, generally speaking, not entirely, is created by vinyl or cotton or material that's hoisted up on the building. This flag is actually initially shown on the floor of a gallery, a public space, Corner House in Manchester, and then Leicester City Gallery. You walk through it. These notions of borders, control, illegal immigration, migration, is something that perhaps I was kind of touching on and has largely captured my kind of imagination. So, yes, there's one thing, creating work, and then how do you position it in the curated framework, where and how? I think those things have changed for me. Of course, the time is different, but undoubtedly, I think always striving for the media, the medium and the form, and the battle, the kind of the conflict between the overriding politics that I might have just mentioned here, and the free expression, if you like, of any ideas that you might want to explore, experiment, explore, kind of, even it could be abstracted.
Sorry, I'm interrupting you, but I'm worried about us running out of time to do some more questions.
Yeah, I was wanted to pick up on, thanks Said, on Marlene's expression that her window's closing. Because I like that, because it makes me think about the fact that I started making work with the idea that there was this absence that needed to be addressed, and that absence was the absence of black women in museums, either on the walls, represented on the walls, or in the museum as artists whose work was on the walls. So the subject, I decided that my subject was black women, and that was going to be my subject forever. And I suppose my window's been slightly opening in the past, decade, I guess. Partly because of political changes. Not that, in a way, we were talking about this last night, many things seem to be not that different than they were in the 80s, despite the fact that we've had some major legislation changes that have improved everyone's lives. But my eye has changed in the sense that I started to bring in images of black men into my work, which I had never done before, because it feels like a crisis moment for black men as a presence in this world. So I suppose in that way, the window's opened up slightly for me. Yeah, I'm going to stop there because there's a lot more I could say about that.
Sorry, just wanting to quickly mention you've got about 20 minutes.
Okay. Yes. So the second question was about global politics, Jade Foster, and the changes in discourse towards. So it's really great to pick up there from what Claudette was saying about. You talked about the transnational conversation between here and the United States, for example, and the relationship with Black Lives Matter. I think your question was about whether it changes the conversations, whether it changes the discourse. And I guess for me personally, it changes the discourses that black artists and activists are having about what they can and should be doing. It changes the possibilities for organising. I don't know that we're necessarily having a completely new conversation, but it feels like we're having a conversation in a different way. So for me, I'm really excited by Black Lives Matter and by the activism, by the fact that it is driven by women, largely by women, largely by gay and transgendered women. That's very exciting, and it seems right. I don't, in terms of, if you want to change society, if we really want to change institutions, for example, what more fabulous way to make the change than to change some of those personnel? And what would it be like if, think of an institution, was run by a black lesbian woman? What would that, how would that program look? How would that audience look? How would that, how would the teams within the organization look? And they might not actually look any different, but how would they behave differently? So I suppose one of my frustrations, and when I was at the last gathering here, I may have disgraced myself slightly, but we have been having this conversation about, is it different in the 1984? Are we post-race and post-black? We're not post anything. As far as I'm concerned, we're not post in the sense of, sorry, I keep doing this. In 1982, Rashida Reed said, at the Black Art Convention, he said, in his lifetime, we wouldn't see a black Turner Prize winner. I love going back to that quote. And when I sat down and talked to Rashid in his home in about 2001, so halfway, and I said, do you remember saying that? And we talked, and he was really depressed. So having two Turner Prize winners doesn't change the structural difficulties. Slipping one by here and another one over there doesn't change those structural differences. What needs to change is much more fundamental than that. And I think the situation, even though I've been in a kind of depression since Brexit, which has been exacerbated by Trump. But at the same time, the mobilization suggests that something else can happen. And the discourse, the issues may not be any different, but I think there's a different way of having the conversation that could potentially change the result, and I hope that it will mean that it won't be just this moment of crisis and then we all go back to business as usual. I've probably already said too much. Sorry.
No, it's very
I want to
very
introduce
relevant. Sorry, I'm slightly unsure. This is the second question.
Yeah, about global politics.
And from that student. Yeah. I think it's great. I mean, I agree with Marlene entirely, and activism generally, and quite inspiring Black Lives Matter in the US and various factions, or especially Black Lives Matter Nottingham, I believe there is one. That sort of activism is extremely important, and I'm sure it filters down in individual and collective effort to kind of have a kind of a voice, if you like. With reference to, I just think that it's great, and hopefully people get more kind of mobilized in a way to express this kind of very difficult times we're living in anyway. Seems like things haven't really changed, but of course there is a change. Time has changed. I have changed. My perception to things in life and art has changed. And undoubtedly, I kind of feel quite inspired by kind of some of the a younger generation and cross-generational, cross-racial even, if you like, activism and with reference to certain issues, very pertinent issues. We might be using the term post-Brexit, etc. Definitely, yeah, and cross-cultural. And that kind of reminds me a little bit in those days in the 80s where it was cross-cultural as well, but intergenerational. Rashida Reed and, you know, certain individual from a certain generation and us younger artists, young students. So yes, it would kind of definitely be an impact. And I think that in a way, I kind of wanted to make that point, but briefly, with reference to activism in my case. I was in Nottingham in post-college, if you like, 84 to 92, before I went away from Nottingham and lived in different places, including London, is that a really important thing happened in that 1980 to 84 year active. So there were certain activities that were happening the later part of 80s, and various organizations, individual artists, writers in Nottingham were, you know, we were involved in workshops generally, you know, some kind of practical creative workshops, dialogue, various organizations. And there was some kind of a sense of collective organizing, collective work that was happening within the community as artists. Now remember, when we were students, we kind of didn't have that opportunity, hardly. I can't remember, to be honest with you, have any access to any community centers in Nottingham. So when I left college, I had to really kind of dig deep and work through and learn and make mistakes and be in kind of certain awkward situations. So that kind of was important for me, and there is that kind of legacy as well. So in a sense, art is working in the community, or there might be different terms that one may use today. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think transnational global politics and the moment, the fact that now we have the internet and we have social media and we have these ways of making contacts as artists, it's an incredible opportunity. And I think it's being used brilliantly by younger artists. I know organizations like QTPOC, organizations of artists of color, as they would now define themselves, and making the most of those opportunities. And we were talking last night about the fact that, you know, had there been the internet in 1982, there probably wouldn't have been the convention in 1982. We needed that convention because that was the only way that we could find each other, identify each other, have these conversations we needed to have about our work and about our experience of being young artists.
Yeah. That's so important, actually, that we forget that, or I don't forget, that in 1982 we didn't have the internet or even smartphones or stupid phones or anything. So one of the themes that keeps coming up is this thing about, you know, were we more radical in 1980, blah. And I don't think we were more radical. I just think that we had to do things in a different way. So if I wanted to know what Claudette was doing, she could not send me, she couldn't FaceTime me. So, you know, we had to physically, we had to get the Stickman machine out and print up some posters and get people to physically come to places. Whereas now you don't have to do that.
Yeah. I think the other thing I'd add is that, you know, on its way to becoming the Black Art Group, the Black Art Group was once called the Pan-African Connection. And that was because there was a real recognition and desire to make global links, and those global links were, you know, very difficult to make because we didn't have the technology, but there was the consciousness of a bigger story that we were connected with. So yeah, really interesting.
And the last question was about a kind of distinction between the radical black art and the stuff that the guys were making and the modernism. Is that right? Have I got that right?
Is art for white institutions?
Yeah. So yeah, I think that's such a big conversation.
Yeah.
So, I would say that one of the things that's coming out of the conversations that I'm having with colleagues, and Paul Goodwin is here, I think he's just left the room actually, is here, but who is also part of the Black Artists and Modernism project. And there are lots of people that are not necessarily in the room with us in the Black Artists and Modernism project, but there's been so much scholarship recently looking back at that work, and we're already seeing new things being published about it. So I would say that one of the things that we're talking about is to what extent there are differences and similarities. And I'm surprised, actually, by some of the similarities between what we're calling radical black art and some of that kind of gallery-focused work. Because, you know, those individuals are citizens and have been citizens, and they work in a multiplicity of ways. And we're not always aware of those things. So I would say that, I agree that there are distinctions and there are different ways of working.
I'd like to add a point, and I'm wondering whether or not there are tables in which people would want to address a question and have not had an opportunity.
We've got
we
time
will have
for
time,
another
so we can just finish it.
Do you want to finish?
Yeah, definitely. Claudette? With the third question.
Yeah, I mean, I thought the end of that question was to do with whether art is being made for white institutions or for the community. Was that what you said? Yeah. And
what impact would it have internationally or something as well?
I'm just interested by that split, that dichotomy. It seems I don't consider that I'm making work for an institution.
I think the institutions come in that there are institutions that exhibit work, there are institutions that commission work, there are institutions that purchase work, for example. There are institutions that teach about art. So I would say that I want to be involved in all of those institutions. I also want there to be an audience of black people looking at my work. They're certainly in the work. And I don't think it's that complicated. I don't think it's difficult for institutions in the UK to have diverse audiences and to have diverse staff and to have diversity throughout what they do. I don't currently think that everybody's really signed up genuinely to do that as yet. But in terms of artists, I don't think it's useful to try and make a distinction between some artists who want to do white institutions and some who don't. I think what we need to do is look at the work. And in a lot of cases now with contemporary work, it's not even looking at the work, it's engaging with the work. So, you know, artists are working on in a whole range of different ways. Sometimes they are making objects, precious objects, but quite often there's a lot of really interesting work that doesn't revolve around that at all. So I don't know if I feel like I can't really give a definitive response to that because it's such a, you know, it's a different. It's not really a question. It's like it's an observation of what is going on out there, and I would say that my observation is slightly different to yours.
But linked to that, I think the idea of white institutions makes it sound as if we don't have a place within them, or we don't. Yeah, we're not entitled to that. These institutions belong to all of us, and I think a lot of the time in the 80s we were working towards making a space in these institutions for our work. So that has to continue. We have a right, we have a right to use these places.
The place is here.
The place is
here. The place is here. But, and now.
Yeah,
the time is now.
I think importantly. Equally important and valid what Marlene and Claudette has said with reference to art in an institution like Nottingham Contemporary. I would add maybe with this question there's the idea of the artist working within the community. And if you do an exhibition, actually the Radical Black Art Convention was held at Ukaidi Centre, it was a kind of community centre actually, and there were exhibitions held there in various places, and I'm sure there are in various places around the country today. I think there is a kind of, and I don't think it's wrong to say that. Of course, it's a beautiful building, and contemporary museums, whether it's in Walsall, London, or Nottingham. I think does it mean that the work that's shown in a community centre negates itself? Definitely, sure, works and collections should happen in Birmingham, Wolverhampton museums, and Nottingham. But at the same time, I don't think we should shy away from showing and screening our works in alternative spaces, which are kind of trendy in Berlin and London, off-site space and this and that. But a lot of black artists, we were doing things in community centers, you know, having a dialogue. I remember as a student going to see a film in another community center in Nottingham by a young, interesting filmmaker from America, from US. So anyway, these sort of things were, you know, kind of a talk and a screening of a film and things like that. I think finally, not to go on too much, but this question is very important. I think, Jagdish, you said that, and if I'm correct, that some of the artists and writers from here might have had an impact in the independence movements of Africa and Asia. I think that was kind of one of the points that you were trying to say. As art as a vehicle for change. And Gavin Jantes, whose work is actually upstairs, and he inspired me from South Africa, and he lived in Hamburg, and he did this amazing series of works, and especially silkscreen prints, which had a profound impact on myself, working with silkscreen in the media, and then one of my prints is upstairs. But he actually, I think, is between Europe and had gone to South Africa. He was very active in anti-apartheid movement. So there is this thing about writers in the 60s. You know, I was in East Africa when the Uganda, Kenya, and Tanzania were independent, 61, 62, 63. And there is some story that writers or people in exile had an impact. So that kind of the internationalism was actually discussed, had penetrated our discourses in the 80s at various levels. That's kind of an interesting scenario, I think, that how art, so you're talking about the local and the global before the word became sexy, you know what I mean? This notion that, so these things were happening within, this is a kind of construct of post-colonialism. I don't want to go on about it, there's all sorts of post-racial, post-black, post-whatever. But within that context, I mean, our context is that people from Asian, African, Caribbean background have a colonial connection, that's why we are here. That's why, because the white people from here were in those countries. And there's a whole exploitative legacy, which is a totally different field, interestingly overlapping in this discourse. The reason why we are here in Europe is because you were there. You know, that's as simple as that, and it's been talked about, written about. So that framework within the context of visual arts, which is primarily the ethos of this convention, and of course filters into different areas, I really welcome this position where how it had an impact on the independence of those countries. And I am one of the products of that East African country. So how art can mobilize in a different way, you know, internationally, I think it's been profound. How effective it has been, that's a different issue.
Okay, apparently we've only got 10 minutes left, so we've got time for 2 questions.
I'm quite interested in the fact we are talking about the 1980s. And
sorry, can you say who you are?
Sorry, my name's Tara, I'm a curator from Leicester, a freelance curator. I'm quite interested that I suppose the time we're in now, we're talking about the 1980s, you're artists from the 1980s, this fantastic exhibition upstairs that we've got. And as you mentioned earlier, that came out of a time of radicalism, a time of anger, a time when society, there was a certain rebellion that was happening. And I think through the 90s and the 2000s, some of the artists that became big, I like the ones that won the Turner Prize, were quite wishy-washy in their statements to a certain extent when we're looking at black art. And we're coming into a time where we're back to that rebellion, we're back to that anger, and the younger artists are feeling quite hostile in their environment. What are you, as the elders of this art, British art format, doing to help these younger members?
And then we got
Chuck the page.
Hello, Mojisola Adebayo, I'm a theatre artist. I think my question connects with what the sisters just raised. One thing I noticed that you've all got in common, and I've probably got in common with you, is that you're all trained, you're all educated, you all went to polytechnics, colleges, universities, you probably all got grants, or lots of us did back in the day. So my question is around, and probably lots of you teach or have taught at some point, and probably still do or will do in the future, and so do I. So I'm interested in what is our role in radicalizing education, reclaiming education. What is our role as elders, if you like, of making sure that our Black and Asian young people have places in universities, not just what they study, but they can even get in the door. The idea of going to university to do an art subject anyway was preposterous to my Nigerian father, and I understand why. But now the thought of coming out with an arts degree and 30 grand debt, are you crazy when there's no work? Tough. In this era, when the economy is about to fall apart because of Brexit. So, and if I'm ever a parent, I now relate to what my dad was talking about. So what is our place as artists, as teachers, as elders, as the educated, as the ones who benefited from grants? What is our place now in radicalizing education for our Black and Asian young people?
Thank you. Very, very powerful question.
No, don't ask me to start. No.
I think I'm going to start with this question and go back to that one. That's exactly the kinds of questions that I have been asking myself in the last little while. I'm not going to bore you with my personal biography, but I think that one of the things that is happening that artists of my generation are trying to do is to be custodians of that story of what has happened and to put it out into the public realm so that it can be shared within education, so that younger generations can have a more holistic view of what has been possible and what has happened before. So I certainly feel a very personal responsibility that my daughter's generation don't have the same experience that I had when I was asking my tutors about Black artists. So, and my role in that, I think, having been part of this movement, is to make my archive available to write, to enter into the discourse more fully. In terms of the artists from the 1990s, I mean, I could say more about that, but I absolutely agree with you that those are the things that need to be done. So I think, personally, I'm trying to think about how strategically I can be instrumental in that. And I'm working on the Black Artists and Modernism project. I'm working with Claudette and Keith on the Black Art Group research project. Is trying to do that, trying to enter into a dialogue with millennials and with the younger generations. I don't find it a very easy thing to do, partly because I'm not, although I work with an institution, I kind of have half a toe in an institution. So trying to do that as an independent is really difficult, actually. So as old and grey as I am, that struggle, I remember listening to a conversation that happened, quite a difficult conversation with a group of artists of my age group and a younger generation talking about, and the younger ones were saying to the older ones, what are you doing for the emerging artists? And the older ones were saying, when do you think emerging stops? Having 20, 30, 40 years of experience does not necessarily correlate to okay, we've stopped emerging and we've done emerge now. That doesn't happen. So part of my responsibility is to say to my daughter is 19 and she wants to be an artist. She wants to be a performing artist. And my responsibility is to tell her the truth about what that means and what that is, and then to help to guide her if she will enter into that conversation. Yeah. So that, I've already talked too much on that one. And in terms of the 1990s artists and whether they're wishy-washy or not, that, again, I think that what does tend to happen is that we receive information about what artists are and what they think in particular formats. So when I look at Steve McQueen's work from the first piece of work that I ever saw of his to the last piece of work that I've seen of his, the work is talking about race, it's talking about gender, it's talking about sex, it's talking about power, it's talking about visibility. So all of that, is not at all wishy-washy. One of the issues that I think the next generation, or even half a step of a generation down from our lot, had to deal with was that the institution is pulling out its diverse drawer and saying, yep, come on, jump in here, please, jump in here, so that we can frame you, so that we can say you represent black people. And that generation was saying, actually, I'm just going to make my work. Now, just because I'm making my work, it doesn't mean I don't want to be black. It means I want to define myself with my practice and not by your headlines. And I think that when we're talking about who's an ally, who's wishy-washy, who's radical, what we need to do is address ourselves to what they make, rather than what front row on Radio 4 say they make, or what the headline in The Observer says they make, because that is not going to tell us. And I think one of the issues maybe about this new way of communicating via sound bites and Facebook is that we don't have conversations. Now, I may not have agreed with Rashida Reed in 1982, but he was standing right there in front of me, so I could hear what he was saying, and I could put my hand up and say, what do you mean? And I think that, so I'm talking too much.
There's a question here.
Time is different as well, so in a sense with the...
can we have a mic at that table just in front of us?
I just wanted to add to what Marlene was saying. I think it's fantastic. I think from a young person's perspective, it's also about accessibility into these spaces. So I went to a talk at Freeze Academy actually with Sam Thorne and Lubena. And for me, Lubena was incredible. She was pioneering for me as a black curator, freelance. So the space itself, about 30 to 40 people, there weren't that many young people there sitting there. And the ones that were felt still disconnected from a space where the ticket was about £15 to attend. So for me, it's really important to talk about accessibility into the spaces, into where your works kind of sit, the archives that you build in which they can be shared upon, but also about the intergenerational conversations. I think conversations are important, but conversations like this, having an intergenerational conversation, is how we progress forward. Because although you've had these experiences about being the singular black woman or black person in your course, I too was the singular black woman, and I graduated in 2014 from Nottingham Trent. So we have so many similarities and disparities between our experiences, and so by speaking upon that, like you say with your daughter, I think it's something that we need to continue to do, definitely in spaces like Nottingham Contemporary and other spaces in the UK. So intergenerational conversations are what young people are actually doing. I have a bunch of zines that are created by young black women talking about their experiences, because they create these zines because media publications won't write them. So the conversations are happening, they are being removed offline. I'm trying to create those spaces offline as well. I think it's integral to our progression. But it's the way in which we communicate with the elders and how we learn from their experiences but progress forward and forever stop thinking that we're emerging and forever emerging, but instead use the experiences that you have shared and what we experienced at the same time to then look for our younger brothers and sisters coming into the institutions and the systems. So I just wanted to add to that, I'm sorry.
No, don't apologise.
Okay.
It's an overlapping kind of situation, and I think the role of an artist is one of the strands that I'm picking up in a couple of points raised. I think there's we live in a kind of, generally speaking, celebrity culture, of course, and the star system. So we've had this example, the commercially successful artist. And then there's kind of notions of people working within the institution as artists, as practitioners, researchers. And I think that it's a bit difficult situation to be kind of independent. A lot of us have worked in that situation. We work with community projects and whatever. That the commissioning and the local authority funding largely, or private funding, is kind of a cut. So this notion of going for something like fine art is more contentious today than it ever was. In our days, we were lucky, most of us, we would be entitled to a grant, and the fees were kind of paid. It's very difficult going to a creative course today. I can understand the feelings and a person coming from a certain background. And there's this debate actually interrelated. Of course, I'm not interested in going into it depth, but I should mention that it's a white working class issue in London art colleges as well, or in London generally, that will they go into creative fields when you've had Alexander McQueen and other artists, who come from working class backgrounds, who have been successful as visual artists or fashion designers. And so it's kind of an interesting issue there, whether they would go into a creative field which there is uncertainty in life. At the same time, it hasn't been an easy access for individuals and certain people to enter and work within institutions like higher education, if you like, and researching. It's taken time, and importantly, yes. But I think that I can say from my personal experience, a lot of us had to work outside these two parameters, which was these success stories of Steve McQueen and Chris O'Philly, as so-called, in that particular paradigm, as successful artists from the black kind of background, if you like. But I think the independent as an artist working within the community and community projects has been around for a long time, but and it comes and goes according to local authority. This is actually work produced largely in consultation with schools and community centres with different types of funding structures, including EU. One of the series that I was involved in Leicester called Cultural Mapping, an 18-month project in and around cities in 2 or 3 different phases, where we had to work with community centres, communities and various workshops. So there is a kind of a way where artists were engaged in creating work and having some kind of legacy, which could be semi-permanent, ephemeral work, outside a gallery museum situation, outside an institution of higher education, of teaching and researching. So there are these 3 or 4 strands, and perhaps even more, that I might not be aware. It's very important that the artist he or she has possibilities not only to explore, but to collectively engage and seek different types of funding on the position of creating this series of works or expression. Yes, I think that not enough has been talked about this 3rd or 4th dimension of a practice of an artist, which is actually largely a lot of artists in US or Europe. We work in that capacity, where it's non-institutional and non-commercial. Thank you.
I'd like to, I've been told that we've run out of time and it's time to eat. Yes?
Yeah, we're out of time now, so.
And as chair of this particular table, I have the prerogative to tell you something from my point of view, and I really wanted to come across to students. Here's what I'd like to say to you students, is that really there's no such thing as art. What we do as people, as creative people, we solve problems. If you're a sculptor, you have to make sure your sculpture stands and that it won't fall over and injure people. You also want that piece of sculpture to express something, to tell a story. And I have a feeling that that's what we're doing here. And it's time to eat.
Thank you, Charles. So I want to say thanks to our panel. Thank you. And thanks for your great questions as well. We're now going to break for lunch. And just to mention that during the lunch hour, if you can think about which tables
wishy-washy. And I'm interested in that because it makes me think how easy it is to silence certain voices within the work, within the art world. And when we were making and showing in the early 80s, often what would be picked up by the media when those exhibitions were talked about was, what actually would say, angry young men paintings. These paintings full of expletives, this kind of aggressive, violent text attached to these aggressive, violent images. And within those shows, there would be work by women, myself included, that didn't necessarily have text or blood, although sometimes there was blood. And And I'm concerned that actually that work was completely, became not quite invisible, but went under the radar a bit because it didn't fit in with the construction that was being devised by the media of what black art was. And we're at a point now where, where we can open up this term, where we need not to be shutting down voices, closing down voices. There are lots of things that were being explored in work, sexuality and gender, that are being talked about more openly now. And it's just, I'm losing my time. But it's very important that those conversations are opened up and can be made without the fear that somehow it won't be seen as radical, what you're doing. Somehow it won't be seen as important to the main dialogue. These conversations are really, really important and must be allowed to thrive in whatever the current setting is. And I agree, we were very lucky that we were practicing at a time when there were grants, when you were allowed to make your work for 3 years completely funded by the government. That's an amazing moment, and I would do everything in my power to bring that back if I could. But the most important thing is to feel that whatever you do have to say, if you can get into an art college, you can start making your work, that whatever you have to say, it's important, and there's no single narrative that you have to follow as a black artist making work in 2017.
Is are we ready for food or not? No? Yes, no? Just give me a signal.
1 o'clock.
Sorry? 5 minutes. Okay.
5 minutes more.
Yeah, hang on, there's another question. We'll do another question.
Hi, hello. I'm Sunil Shah. I'm an artist and independent curator. I just wanted to pick up on something that Marlene mentioned about the sort of narratives being art historical narratives being kind of restricted and narrow, and that, as kind of curators, as artists, as directors, programmers, we have a responsibility to open up those narratives and to find other ways. So it's not only a case of revisiting the past and saying, well, these movements exist, but also to reframe artworks and ways of looking at things in other formats and other ways that might also integrate with something that's not just under a banner of black arts, but spreads out much further. Just an observation, right?
At the back. Is that a question over there? Sorry.
Hi, I know my name's Shama. I'm also a freelance curator, and it's interesting how many of us are in the room and we're not in the institutions, and maybe that's where I wanted to go back to Marlene's comment about kind of closing your frame, concentrating on what you're doing in your own practice, the concerns of your own practice, and to maybe to ask the curators of this show to speak, because they haven't spoken so far, and I think that's important.
Now? Is there a question?
Yeah, I don't know. How did you feel putting together this show and giving us a frame?
Sorry, we can't hear you. Are you having a conversation?
Yeah, no.
Maybe it's important.
I want to know about the experience of curating the show, how it might influence the programme at Nottingham Contemporary in the future. Kind of, how do you feel about the imbalance in personnel in your institutions? And yeah.
Sorry, is that a question to us?
I'm not
Sorry,
sure.
Just repeat the question. Sorry,
can you
can't
stand
hear
up?
you.
No,
is it a question to us or a comment?
No, I want to involve the curators of this show as well, because it's about them as much as the artists involved, I feel.
Okay.
So one of them sat next to me.
I don't know if Sam wants to maybe say something specifically about the it's in relation to Nottingham. I'm one of the curators of the show, but work in a museum in the Netherlands where this show kind of originated. And I mean, the exhibition, one of the reasons to first of all do the exhibition in the Netherlands was to initiate a discussion in the Netherlands amongst black artists in the Netherlands about their position about some of these conversations, which in the Netherlands has not been addressed in any way like it has done in the UK. I mean, there was a very specific set of conversations and concerns that came out of the 80s in Britain, which the show upstairs attests to. With that, with showing that work and those sets of conversations in the Netherlands, they then precipitated a whole series of dialogues with artists in the Netherlands, which are sort of unfolding this year. So it's had a material impact. I think one of the discussions that we talk about is when we have these discussions, and of course we look around our curatorial office and there's a white director, a white curator putting on this show. And yeah, we're all white, and that is the reality in the Netherlands, and I think in the UK that, of course, needs to be addressed. Does that mean I need to give up my job, or one of us needs to give up our jobs to allow space for black curators to work? Yeah, these are some of the hard questions that need to be asked in institutions. So programming, it's had a huge effect in terms of personnel. We're still a bunch of white curators programming this stuff. So that's the task that needs to happen.
Yeah, I'll follow on a little bit from Shama's question a little bit. And I think maybe kind of try to connect it to something that Marlene, you said earlier, which was around the systemic racism of some of arts institutions. And you gave the example of you were talking about Frank Bowling, right? And talking about how is his work framed in institutions, and about how biography kind of plays a role in a way that it would not for another artist of his generation, a kind of white American artist, for example. And I think, I mean, what I was thinking about when you were making that point, and I think connects to Shama's question, was the exhibition about abstract expressionism that was at the Royal Academy just a few months ago, that there was one painting by Norman Lewis in that exhibition, one small painting hung in a corner. And it's kind of, what is it about the institution of art history that these exclusions continue to happen over and over again? And I think these are important questions to have. It's one of the reasons that this was an exhibition I wanted to do here. It's one of the reasons that it seems a small point, but the title of the exhibition at the Van Abbe Museum was Thinking Back. It was one of the reasons we wanted to locate it in the present tense and to kind of change that title to the places here. To use the exhibition as a platform for conversations about, well, how do we change institutional structures? How do we kind of change these conversations when the exhibitions might be changing in certain kind of places, not everywhere, as evidenced by the Royal Academy show or kind of many others. But it still feels like we have a long way to go before the other story becomes just the story. And the way we do that is not just through programs. The way we do that is like making structural kind of processual change. And there's a huge amount of long way to go with that, to Shama's question. And I would say, I mean, this is one of the reasons that we wanted to have this as a convention. This is, not a conference, not a bunch of speakers just coming and everybody's listening. It's about, well, okay, what are the propositions?